guys, welcome back to Tutorial Tuesdays. I'm going to be showing you how to make a basic cylinder today. So we'll be centering, opening up, pulling the walls and shaping. I've been commissioned to make 2 coffee mugs, so I'm going to be making 2 today. So I'll also show you how you would kind of measure them to make sure you end up with 2 identical pots. So I've got my 2 pieces of clay that I've wedged. These are 450 grams each. And I'm aiming to make a cylinder that is going to be 8 centimeters wide and 6.5 centimeters tall once it's fired. So I've actually bought this shrinkage ruler from Hartley & Noble. My clay shrinks 10%, so I use this side, and this has got the extra 10% added on. So I measure using this throughout, and then I know once it's fired, it will then be the correct measurements that I want. So I'll be using this throughout. Take your piece of clay. I just start by patting it into like a rough ball shape. Doesn't have to be perfect, but I'm just trying to get rid of any kind of big creases, and I want to make sure it's a nice smooth area that's going to go down first. And that's just because if you had, say, like a big kind of dip like this, if that was to go down first, that would trap a little pocket of air, and then it would just make centering and everything really awkward, and yeah, it just wouldn't go well. So make sure you pick a nice smooth area, aim for the middle and throw it down. It doesn't matter if it doesn't quite get in the middle, so you can just leave it where it is, keep it stuck, and just kind of, so mine needs to go that way a little bit, just push it across like that, and then you're good. And then I'm going to start kind of pressing it into a cone shape. So I'm just kind of using my hands to leverage the wheel around like this. So something like this, so a rough kind of cone shape. That's going to make sure the clay is really nice and stuck down, and the cone shape is also going to help when we cone up the clay next. It's going to keep the nice round top, whereas if you've kind of like smushed the top in, I find when I then cone up, the top kind of goes a bit funky. So I'm going to wet my hands. I'm going to go full speed with the wheel. I'm going to start by centering the clay. If I rest my hands on the clay, you can see they're kind of wobbling. That means the clay's not centered. If you were to try and pull up your walls and the clay's doing that, it'd be really hard. So you always start by centering. So I'm going to take my fingers and kind of overlap them like this. I'm going to wrap my hands around the clay, and I'm going to squeeze my hands together, and I'm kind of pulling the clay right into the center of the wheel. And you can see I'm kind of using the solid parts of my hands here to squeeze the clay. And you always want to make sure your arms are locked onto the splash pan as well, and I'm really kind of using my arm muscles just to squeeze the clay together. Then I'm going to dunk my hands again, and now we're going to cone it down. So I'm going to take my right hand, and I'm going to have like a right angle in my wrist here, and I'm going to really push with the heel of my hand from the side, and then with my left hand I'm going to take this part on the very top of the clay and push down. So I'm doing this. Again, you want to make sure your arms are planted on the splash pan, nice and strong. So I'm pushing in with this one, pushing down with this one. And then coming away from the clay, always nice and gradually and gently. So now you can see it already looks a lot more centered. There's still a bit of a wobble down here, so I'm going to go again. You just basically keep repeating those 2 steps until your clay is nice and centered. So fingers overlapped, hands wrapped around, squeezing the clay right into the middle of the wheel. Then we're going to push it back down again. So I'm pushing in with this one, pushing down with this one. Nice. Okay. So now if I rest my hands on the top, you can see my hands are nice and still, and the clay is nice and still and centered. So I said earlier that I want to make a cylinder that's 8 centimeters wide. So I need to make sure that my piece of clay here is wide enough for that. So if I measure it now, it's about 7 centimeters. So I need to just keep centering that down to get it a bit lower and a bit wider. So I'm just going to do the same thing, pushing down with this one, pushing in with this one a little bit to keep it centered. And then I'll measure again. A little bit more. So there it's getting a little bit dry, so let's get a bit more water. So now it's about 8 centimetres. So now when I open it up, the clay is going to be wide enough to open it 8 centimetres. If it's narrower and you try and open it wide, you end up with like a kind of an overhang. Next we're going to open up the clay. So for this I use my left thumb, right index finger and kind of lock them together like this. So this thumb's kind of over the top. This just feels most comfortable for me. A lot of people kind of prefer just 2 thumbs. My thumbs don't really comfortably go in at that angle, so I'd like to do this. And I'm just gonna find the center at the top here and just start pushing down. Once I've made a little dip like that, I scoop a little bit of water in there and then keep going. So I'm trying to aim for about kind of just under a centimetre. So I'm going to just measure that using my pin tool. So you just poke it all the way through the base, slide your finger down to where the clay is, hold it nice and tight and take it out. That's how thick the bottom is. So it's just under a centimetre. So that's good for me. Now we're going to pull it out to be that 8 centimetres wide. So I'm going to take my 2 thumbs this time. I'm just going to rest them, so my tips are resting on the base, and then I'm going to pull them apart opposite directions. And you want the wheel to still be going full speed, but you want to keep your thumbs nice and kind of steady and stable. So there it's starting to get a little bit dry up here, so I'm just going to add a little bit more water and then keep going. I'm going to measure about there. So I'm just going to take my shrinkage ruler. So that at the moment is about 7 centimetres, so I'm going to go a little bit more. Now that's 8, so that's perfect. So next we're going to compress the base. This step is super important because it helps prevent little cracks from forming when the clay is drying. So you're literally just going to take your finger behind a sponge and just gently press from the middle out to the edge, just back and forth. Not enough pressure to really kind of dig down, just enough to kind of compact it all together. Oh. So now we've got our base finished. We're now going to start working on pulling this thick bit of clay up into the walls. First, my pot is slightly kind of flaring out, so I'm just going to collar that in. So I'm just going to take my hands and I'm just going to push towards the middle. So I just then took the heel of my hands and pushed the clay towards the center, and that just kind of gathers it in. That's just going to help you create a more upright pot. It kind of starts you off really nicely. If you start off and your pot is flared out, it's going to be more difficult to kind of keep it straight. So now I'm going to take my sponge. I always like to do my first pull with my sponge in my hand, so I kind of hold it behind my middle finger like this. I'm going to have my hands connected, so I kind of rest my thumb on the top here. I've got this sponge right where the clay meets the wheel at 3 o'clock, and I've got my left hand on the inside. I'm going to give a little pinch together and hold for a second. That lets the clay kind of gather up above where your sponge is. And then I'm going to pull that gather of clay all the way to the top. So you want to go nice and slow, try not to rush it, and then pretend there's more clay there and come right off the top like that. So you want to pretend there's extra clay. That way it keeps everything nice and even. When I do my lessons, I notice a lot of people, they get to about here and then they want to come off it, but then you kind of miss out the top and you end up getting a thick bit. So pretend there's that extra few centimetres and come right up through the top like this. I'm going to add another little layer of water over the walls. So now you can see that's kind of like lifted some of the clay up. It's made it nice and even, nice and smooth. So now I can go in with just my fingers. It's going to be a lot easier. So I'm doing the same thing, giving a pinch together and holding for a second so that clay gathers above my fingers. And then I'm going to nice and slowly lift that gather of clay all the way to the top. And then when I get to the top, pretend there's more clay and come right up through it like that. Add another little layer of water. You don't want to add loads of water, but you want to make sure the wall is kind of coated. And we're going to go again. So pinch and hold, and then nice and slow all the way to the top. And then I'm easing off and kind of coming right through. Like that. So at this point I'm going to start having like a little feel. So mine maybe still feels a little bit flared at the bottom, so I'm just going to try and pull up one more time. So I'm giving it a little pinch, letting it gather, staying under that bump and pulling it right up. Cool. So now I'm just going to get rid of a little bit of this excess clay from the bottom. Now I'm just going to make sure it's nice and straight on the sides. I prefer to just do this by eye, so I kind of lean over to the side. And what I'm doing is just gently from the inside, as I move up, push out slightly if it looks like it's kind of more inwards. I think it's a bit bigger than 6.5. Yeah, it's about 1 centimetre taller, so I'm just going to cut a little bit off. It's 8 at the top, so that's great. So I'm just going to take a pin tool and I'm just going to hold it kind of towards the end like this, hold it really nice and steady and stable. I'm going to kind of make sure my arm is rested on the splash pan. I'm going to have one finger kind of just resting on the inside, and then I'm going to start the wheel and start pushing that through. And then when you feel it on your inside finger, you know it's cut through. Just like that. Then you can stop the wheel and lift up. And then when you do that, it does kind of misshape in the top a little bit, so we'll fix that now. So I'm just going to very gently take a finger and thumb, one on each side, and then just rest one finger on the top. And you're making like a little channel for the rim to run through. That just gets it back to being a nice circular shape. Once you're kind of happy with your cylinder, the finishing steps are just to take out any water from the inside. I'm just kind of holding my sponge in there. And there's your cylinder finished. So to get it off the wheel, I'm going to take a bit of water and just squeeze it right around the base. Then I'm going to take a wire tool, just keep my thumbs on the top. I'm going to push down into the water and away from me. I'm going to come back round, do it again. You want to keep repeating until your pot starts to slide like that. If the wire won't come out, you can just leave the wire where it is. I'm going to take one hand flat off the side of the wheel, finger and thumb at the base to push it onto your hand. And then you want to lift up, lose the wire, and then you want to gently then slide your pot off onto a bat. Like that. And get started on our next one. So you basically just want to make sure that all the steps you do exactly the same. So I'm going to start by centering the clay, so I'm taking my hands on each side, squeezing up, pushing down, squeezing up, pushing down. Okay, so we want to center this piece of clay so that it's wide enough. Yep. Then we're going to take finger and thumb and push down the middle. So you want to make sure that your base is the same thickness. So you're going to take the pin tool again and just measure that. Yep, so like just under a centimetre. Then we're going to widen that using your thumbs. And just use your ruler to make sure the opening is the same. So that's 7, so you need to go another centimetre. Touch more. Okay, that should be good. Yep, nice. Next we're going to compress the base. Now we're going to colour it in a little bit. So I've got the heel of my hands together, pushing towards the middle of the wheel just to push the clay in. First pull we're going to do with a sponge behind the middle finger. You're going to pinch together, let the clay gather for a second, and then slowly drag that clay up. And remember to pretend there's more clay coming right up off it. A bit more water. Now we're going to go with just middle fingers. Pinch the clay, let it gather for a second. And lift up. Come right off the top. Okay, now we're going to get the height right. So 6.5. Nice, that's 8 centimetres, 6.5. Now I'm just going to take the water out, cut under with my wire tool, slide it off onto my flat hand, lift and loose that, slide back. Okay, so here are my 2 mugs, my 2 coffee mugs. This one is slightly higher, that's fine because when I come to trim it, just trim a little bit more off the top of this one. I hope you found this video useful. Please let me know if there's anything you'd like me to do in particular for next Tutorial Tuesday. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed. Thanks, bye!